All right, guys, so Alone Season 9, Episode 1 just premiered last night. I want to just do kind of a quick recap, give you my thoughts on the episode, some of what I saw as far as the location goes, and what how their strategies are kind of diverging, like right off the bat. Before we get started on this, I want to thank everyone who has purchased my new book, Surviving Alone. It's all about my experience on Season 8 at Chilco Lake. I'll also want to remind you, if you did get the book, please go back over to Amazon and write out a review. Those things help a lot. Now with that, let's get started. As I mentioned in the last videos, people's sights will vary a lot from participant to a participant, but overall, I think it looks like there's a lot of good diversity here with the spruce timber in the bottoms, the bogs. There's a lot of what looks like old fire scars there. And all of that diversity is great for game, both big and small. So the second thing that stands out is it seems like everyone is seeing bear sign, which, man, I would love to see someone get a bear on this season. And I think we've got a pretty doggone good chance with everybody out there, seemingly everybody out there, seeing good, fresh signs. So we'll have to keep an eye on that and see how that plays out. Now, Benji mentions that his site looks very stalky. So what he's talking about there is that mosaic of timber and open area, the timber and the bogs, and you've got this kind of place that's really conducive to sneaking around with a bow. You've got cover, but then you can also see out into these areas where you would expect to find the bears. And then also another thing that plays into that is the dampness of the ground, which makes it quiet walking and quiet stalking. Great for bear hunting. And then, of course, the black flies. This is something that I forgot to mention in the last video. Guys, without bug dope, which they don't have, black flies can be absolutely horrendous. They are persistent and they can absolutely drive you mad if you let them do it. Now, I don't know if they've got birch on this in this area, but if they do, you can make an insect repellent by rendering out the tar or the sap out of the birch bark. But in order to do that, you need like a tin can or a clay pot or something like that to catch that sap and render it out. It'd be cool to see somebody attempt to do that, but I don't think the flies are bad now. But I don't think they're gonna last long. Once they start getting some cold weather, those flies are gonna go away. So another big thing that stands out to me on this first episode is it seems like this area has got some game in it. We've got multiple people taking grouse and squirrels on the first episode. Everybody's seeing bear sign. I haven't heard any mention of moose yet, so not sure what's going to happen with that, but the bear is very, very encouraging. And then also that multiple people are getting small game right off the bat, and people are actually able to eat something. That's good. That's good for them. And so going through this whole episode, there's one more thing that really stands out to me, and that is how people's strategy is diverging right off the bat as far as their shelter and scouting their area goes. We've got some people who are spending a lot of time really covering their area, making sure that they don't make a mistake on where they set up their shelter. And then you've got other folks who just seem to be setting it up right off the bat. With that said, the only thing that we know is what we're shown, right? We know what the edit is. And so it's hard to tell exactly what people are doing. But from what I can see, there are some people who are setting up shop pretty much, right off the bat without scouting their area. And then there's some other folks who are really scouting their area well, which I would highly, highly, highly recommend. Anybody that's going into Season 10, make sure that you look your area over for all possible resources and possibilities. You want to set that shelter up in the best possible location. All right, so those are kind of the overarching themes that kind of stood out to me. Now I just want to go through the folks that we saw on episode 1 and just talk a little bit about what I saw them doing. All right, so before I launch into talking about different people and what we see them doing, I want to preface this with what we see on the show. This is the edit. This does not mean that this is actually what happened out there. So keep that in mind. This is just what the producers want us to see. So what I'm going to talk about may be different from what these people actually experienced out there. Just know that. The first one we see is Carrie Lee from Idaho. We've got 2 from Idaho this year, so that's good. I like Carrie's attitude. She seems like she spends a lot of time in the woods. She doesn't seem to be getting too excited about things. I mean, that just comes from spending a lot of time in the woods and being comfortable there. So Carrie Lee seems to be scouting her area very, very thoroughly before she decides on a place to set that permanent shelter. And I can't stress the importance of that enough. If you're going to be living in a place for 2 to 3 months, you need to have the best possible location on your site for your shelter. You're looking for somewhere that's dry and sheltered from the wind and the weather. You want good access to resources, and that's water, that's your fishing and trapping areas. Somewhere that has good access to building materials. And then also something that might be easy to overlook is you don't want to put your permanent shelter right in the middle of your best big game hunting area, because if you do, you're going to blow that area out and the animals are going to leave. And so you want your site, not in the middle of your best big game hunting area, but not so far that you have to hike your tail off to get there, because you're going to want to be able to go and check those areas pretty frequently for big game sign. All right, so Carrie Lee also, she misses a shot at a grouse first thing, but then connects with it on the second shot, which is freaking awesome. And then another thing that I noticed that I'm sure some of you have picked up is that she had a shot when that grouse was sitting up on top of this broken off tree, but she didn't take it. Now I don't know why she didn't take it, but I suspect because that was a very risky shot, and that's a great way to lose an arrow. When I was on season 8, I would take shots like that, but I would always move and try to line up a tree behind that grouse. So if I was shooting a grouse in a tree, I would move until there was a tree directly opposite that grouse. So if I missed, I would hit the tree and my arrow would bounce off. Good way to not lose your arrow and be able to take those shots up there. Now, one thing I noticed when it showed Carrie Lee cleaning that grouse is she plucked it, which is exactly what she should have done. Relative to the rest of that bird, there's a lot of fat in that skin. And when I would get a grouse, I would pluck that thing, the whole thing, head, neck, and everything. And there's actually a lot of fat in the neck and the head. So make use of that stuff. All right, so we'll move on to Benji. So right off the bat, what I can see of Benji's site, I like it. It looks like it's got a lot of diversity. He's got the timber, he's got the wetland, boggy areas, and he's got some tidal influence, which also adds to that diversity. And when you've got those different habitat elements all coming together at the same place, that tends to be a magnet for game. Again, both big game and small. So Benji, right off the bat, we see him picking bunch berries, starting to forage and getting some food. He's also putting his bow to work and gets a squirrel right off the bat, which is awesome. Now the big thing with Benji here is that while he's out, looking for food, foraging and hunting and scouting his area, he gets caught in a rainstorm and has to end up setting his shelter up while everything's wet. He's soaking wet, and the rain's coming down pretty hard. Now he admits it, he made a mistake. And should have set his shelter up when he first got there. But to be quite honest, I came about that close from that happening to me my first night at Chilco. I did the same thing Benji did. I hit the ground, I grabbed my bow, and I started walking. I wanted to see what was on my area. I wanted to see if I could find any man-made objects. And just through sheer luck, made a big loop around my area, got back to my spot, said, well, you know, I probably should set up a shelter, and strung up just a temporary tarp shelter. And it wasn't an hour later, the most intense electrical storm I have ever witnessed came through my spot, and it was blowing 40 miles an hour and raining sideways. And if that had come in while I was 2 miles from my drop site where all my stuff was, I'd have gotten soaked, and I would have been in for a very, very uncomfortable first night. So I can't hold that against Benji. I mean, I did the exact same thing. I just avoided that miserable night through luck. But the important thing about that is that he kept a good attitude about it and chose not to complain about the situation, but to find the good in it and look at it as a lesson for how fast the weather can change there. Great attitude. So towards the end there, we see Benji with no shirt on. He's pinching his fat rolls. So Benji really bulked up for this, saying he's going in at 220, and so he's got some weight to lose, which is great. You know, anybody that's thinking about going on this show, you need to put weight on. Even if you go out there and you just absolutely crush it with fish and game and whatever, you're gonna lose a lot of weight, and you need some reserves to help buffer some of those lean times. And then also, it looks like he has really got the 10-cara fishing figured out. He catches 12 little small brookies in one day. But the big thing that I noticed about, he talks about this creek being tidal influenced, and it floods at night, which brings fish up, the tide goes out, the fish get caught. So to me, that looks like a great place to set up what's called a weir, a fish weir. And basically it would be a kind of like a fish trap, but it's like stakes in the creek bottom. So the fish would come up, get up the little creek, and then have trouble getting back out. And so if there are bigger fish coming up and that are going back out with the tide, it might help keep some of those in there. Now, I don't know if that's legal for him to do. I don't know if that's against the rules or not. But if it is, that would be potentially, from what I can see, that'd be a great thing to do there. Now that brings to mind one other thing. Nobody took gill nets on this season as part of their 10 items, which makes me think that I'm just gonna go out on a limb and say gill nets are just not allowed for this season, which is unfortunate. All right, so we'll move on to Jessie. Right off the bat, again, Jessie seeing bear sign. Everybody's seeing bear sign on this first episode. And then she has a bear come through her camp very early on, and she handled it very, very well. She looked very comfortable in that situation, and that is a great sign for Jessie down the road. So one thing that I did notice about Jessie's sight is it looks like it's really, really thick. Now, we may only have seen a very small portion of it, and I hope that's the case, because if her whole sight is really thick like that, that might make it a little bit tough for her. But as I said, we may only have seen just a very small part of it, and I hope that she does have some diversity and that she finds it. All right, we'll move on to Juan Pablo. Now he is coming at this with an interesting attitude, and the first thing that we hear him say is that this area here sucks. Now that, again, that could be just editing. Sometimes they like to play up certain aspects of people's experiences out there, which may not accurately represent what actually happened out there or the way someone actually conducted themselves. The interesting thing about Juan's attitude is he says that he doesn't expect anything, and if he does expect something, he expects it to suck. He expects the worst case scenario, which I like. That's a good way to approach this thing, because if something happens that's anything less than the worst, that makes it good. But when and it may just be the way that it's represented through the edit, but he seems to have a negative outlook on this. That might be a problem, Because if you tell yourself something sucks, it sucks. Even if it doesn't suck. If you tell yourself it sucks, to you it sucks. And that's where that perception is reality thing comes in. And this is something that I write about in my book. And so it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. The way that I approached it is when I went out there, I didn't hope for the best. I didn't expect the best. And I expected things to not go right. But I also did my best to just accept things as they happened and adapt to whatever I found on my site, whether that be, a crappy fishing spot or no big game or, whatever it happened to be. I did my best to adapt to those things, and I hope that Juan Pablo can do that as well, and I think he will. It just, the way that they showed that edit, it just came off, as he has a little bit of a negative attitude. But we'll see. I hope that he can kind of get around that. We'll see how that plays out for him. So Juan Pablo also talks about putting on a lot of weight, says he puts on 60 pounds for this challenge. And so you can pretty much think of that. Any weight that you put on over your standard walking around weight is another day. And that's pretty much how it plays out. Unless you're just super active, you can pretty much plan on losing about 1 pound per day. So he's got 60 days on him right there. And this is a big if you have the fortitude to do it. If you're 50 pounds overweight, you can go out there and sit on a stump for 50 days if you have the resolve. So Juan is one of the folks that seems to be, and again, disclaimer, this could just be the edit, but he seems to be setting up a permanent shelter very, very quickly, presumably before he really scouts his area thoroughly. Again, I don't know if that's really the case, but that's what it seems like on the edit. So the big thing with Juan Pablo is he finds a huge pile of trash out there, which most of the time wouldn't raise an eyebrow other than, man, look at all this crap people left out in the woods. But out there in this situation, that stuff is absolute gold. All of those tin cans, he looked like he found some paint cans and metal buckets and stuff like that. And he was able to make a very cool stove. He seems like a pretty ingenuitive guy. Made a nice barrel stove and then took clay and put all over that. And so that clay, when that gets good and dry and baked out, when he starts a fire in there, it's going to heat that clay up, and that clay has got a lot of thermal mass to it. It's going to be radiating heat out all night long, and that's going to help him conserve his firewood and also his energy later on. All right, so we've got Igor up next. He looks like he's spending a lot of time really scouting his area. Again, that's something that I would highly encourage you to do if you're gonna go do something like this. Look your area over. Can't stress it enough. And then also looking at him just shooting his bow when he was back home, when they show those clips from back home, he looks like he knows what he's doing. He's got good form, so it's gonna be interesting to see how he can put that bow to work for him. And then also his site looks pretty, from what I can see, looks pretty comparable to Benji's site. Looks like he's got good diversity, looks like he's got some tidal influence, shows him eating some seaweed, which is great, lots of nutrients and vitamins in those, good salt. I don't think he took salt, so that's gonna be a big one for him. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what Igor can do with this site as the season goes on. All right, so last but certainly not least is Jacques. And the first thing we see of Jacques is him laying in his bag, and we can see some skint poles, some peeled poles behind him. And so it looks like he's spending some time setting up his permanent shelter pretty doggone quickly, like Juan Pablo. I would have liked to have seen him scout his area a little bit more before starting on a permanent shelter. But as I said, this could just be the edit. This could just be what we're being shown. I don't know if that's actually what he did. He could have looked all over his site and determined that that was the best spot. It's hard to tell. So the big thing with Jacques is he finds a foothold trap, a beaver trap. Guys, that's an 11th item right there. That could potentially be a game changer, especially if he knows some basic beaver sets to employ that thing properly. And just the fact that he found the trap there tells me that there's probably beaver there, because there's not going to be, a trapper wouldn't have set there historically if there's not beaver in the area. So, and beaver meat is great. Beaver are full of fat, and if you know what you're doing, you can trap them, basically all year long. Even after freeze up, you can set under the ice. It's a little bit different with a foothold trap, but if he knows what he's doing, he could make very, very, very good use of that beaver trap. Now, I got some comments on YouTube talking about perhaps using that for bear. You're not going to catch a bear in that trap. That's too small. But for beaver, yeah, you can do that. So another thing that I notice about Jacques is he is wearing merino wool, which is exactly the stuff that I wore, and I like wool, especially for something like this where you're going to be wearing it day in and day out. Wool doesn't. First of all, it keeps you warm when it's damp, but the big thing with this type of thing, you're basically living in your clothes. If you're wearing synthetics, God almighty, you're gonna freaking stink. But if you're wearing wool, that stuff, it just doesn't allow the bacterial growth that causes that stench that you smell when you pick up like a pair of synthetic or a synthetic top or something like that. If you've worn it for the day, that thing just reeks. Wool doesn't do that. So, not a huge deal, but, if you're living in your clothes, it could be. All right, and then he also, there towards the end, he gets both a grouse and a squirrel pretty doggone close together. Now, it's hard to tell from the video, but it looked like he might have skint that grouse, which, like I was talking about with Carrie Lee right off the bat, she plucked hers. If he did skin the grouse, that's a big, he's losing a lot of calories there. There's a lot of fat in that skin. And so you need to take advantage of every calorie that you could possibly gather out there. And so, that's internal organs, that's skin, brains, everything. So I don't know, it's hard to tell, but that's what it looked like to me, that he skinned it. All right, guys, that is going to wrap it up for the season 9 episode recap. If you've got any other observations that I missed, leave them down in the comments, or if you got any questions, leave them down there, and we'll see you guys next Thursday before the new episode rolls out. I'll do some bushcrafty thing. We'll see you next time.